Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Becky and I will introduce you to the guest speakers and give you a little overview of the format that we have today. And we'd like to start by saying Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And there's a lot to do in today's program. Today we have three guest speakers. We have Jay Labov, who is the Senior Advisor for Education and Communication from the National Academies of Sciences. He will be speaking along with Catherine Middlecamp, Professor, Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We will then be speaking with Liesl Folks, Dean, School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at the University at Buffalo, followed by Michael Fontaine, Professor and Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at Cornell University. And in addition to sharing knowledge and learning from our guest speakers, one of our goals for these sessions is to just really help you develop a sense of community and do some networking and meet some other people that have similar interests or might be facing similar challenges to you. So with that in mind, we encourage you to take advantage of the interactivity of the platform. And if you look along the bottom of your screen, you will see that there is a text chat box where you can chat with other people that are participating today and ask questions or have a side discussion. If you click on the question mark, that's where you can post a question to our guest speakers. And in that case, if you type a question in there, the question will pop up on the screen and our guest speakers will respond to that. But what we would really love to see you do is actually come up on stage and have the opportunity to speak with our guest speakers. So if you click on the raise your hand option, you will be brought up on stage, and then you'll have an opportunity to have a discussion with our guest speakers. So with that in mind, we would like to get started with our first guest speakers, who are Jay Labov and Catherine Middlecamp. Jay and Kathy, thanks so much for joining us today to talk about undergraduate courses and STEM education. And of course, one of the things that one of the goals of these discussions and one of the things that we would like to address is the continued underrepresentation of underrepresented students and first-generation students. So we look forward to hearing a little bit about what you have to share today.
I'm Kathy Middlecamp from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I put up on the intro slide there our state map just to indicate that there really are 24 or 25 universities of Wisconsin. We're the one down in the bottom, the flagship. And if you would go to the next slide, I want to go up to about 5,000 feet. That would be showing the Isthmus in Madison. I'm suspecting some of you listening in have been there. And if you go one more slide, I've marked out where the University of Wisconsin-Madison is. I just wanted to start by beginning saying this is a small city, 1,000 acres, 50,000 students, 4,000 faculty and staff, and a lot of kilowatt hours of electricity. And my comments come from having been on this campus for 40 years and teaching in a variety of different settings. Let's go to one more slide now. And I put this one up because if Jay had ended, it would have been with the National Academy's publication that you see on the screen on minority participation. When I started teaching, I want to say my first 20 years, I was working in the trenches with underrepresented groups, typically underrepresented minorities, but also lower socioeconomic status. And I spent most of the first 20 years of my career in a chemistry learning center, in equal opportunity programs, in summer bridge programs, actually founding a physics learning center as well, where I was both encouraging and supporting and mentoring the students, but at the same time, I was learning what the issues were. In truth, I think the students taught me more than I taught them. But I mention this in that this was back in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Diversity was on my screen. I was devoting myself as a PhD chemist to working with these students. And I had actually believed at the time that the way to pave success for students was to work with the students. Okay, One more slide, and you'll see I'm calling this the view from the trenches. Oops, that's two more. One more slide. That I was very much with my head down with a marvelous group of students and who now are successful in careers in many different places. While I was doing that, I happened to notice a few things. One thing I noticed was all the artwork in the textbooks were white males. I noticed most of the people teaching were white males. I was the first woman to lecture in my particular institution. And I started vocally speaking of how everything needed to reflect a more diverse group of students because that was who we had. Um, one more slide, if you would. And I think it was the fact that I was outspoken that we needed to be looking at not only our students, but what we were teaching that led me to being invited to join the author team for the American Chemical Society. I was first a writer and then later the editor-in-chief for 2 editions. What you see on the screen is the 8th edition. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see all the editions that preceded it. This is a longstanding textbook project of the American Chemical Society that got the nickname, the book that broke the mold. So let's go on to what was the mold, and that's that slide. And let me put on my glasses so I can read it. We teach general chemistry as if first we're building a foundation, and so later down the road you can get to the good stuff, if you like. And what I want to do for you, this, by the way, is one of the points that Jay would have made. And let me continue and show you exactly, I think, what he would have been talking about. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to build the foundation with you. Oh, it got built very quickly. One more slide, let's put there. There's the road. And one more slide, let's put the student in. Yes. Stop here. So if indeed in a general chemistry course, or for that matter, a general physics course, we were building a foundation of some very important topics, by the way, so that in later courses, we could get to some of the really interesting issues that chemistry plays a role with in the world, or for that matter, physics or biology. The trouble with this model of building a foundation first is that this may be the only course that students take. And this is the part that I think you would have been hearing from Jay, that I'm echoing. That straight paved road, many of the students, for one reason or another, got off of, failed off of, or had a better plan and just did something else. So getting back to the book that broke the mold, let's switch to the next slide there. What if instead of the straight path, we looked at something that I think is both more contemporary and better represents the types of paths our students are on? And what kind of a curriculum goes with that? If you go with the next slide, I will put up for you the table of contents in, there we go, chemistry in context. You'll see that they are rich, multi-dimensional topics that engage students in learning, engage me, the instructor, in learning, and were a great way to build a foundation because embedded in each one of these topics are all those things that you found on the first slide. This said, one disclaimer. This project of the American Chemical Society was for non-science majors. In other words, they were getting the good stuff. Okay, next slide, and I'll show you where I'm going with this. If I started working with students first and listening to their needs and what they cared about, that was a view from in the trenches. When I started looking at the content we were teaching, mostly echoing what the students had said to me, when are we going to do something that I care about? I got involved in this content-rich project of the ACS, American Chemical Society. But my take-home message was you needed both. You couldn't just do content. You couldn't do just context. These are two sides of the teaching and learning coin. And to put up the flag again on the next slide, this was another view. Whoops, not that one. Back one. Back one. Thanks. This was another view from the trenches, meaning I had my eye on the textbooks, the content, and the students, but not the bigger picture. Starting from that, maybe 20 years ago, I started rethinking the very question that Pat asked when she introduced this session. What does it take to broaden the participation? What does it take to have more students not only on the road, but choosing to stay on it and taking all sorts of different paths? And if you go to the next slide, there's two things I want to add now to just wrap up my introductory comments. There are two different metaphors that I've used to try to explain, starting in the trenches with the students and the curriculum, how I got a bigger view and how I think this particular pathway is one that we all need to be on in some sense if we're going to address some of the issues that brought us together in this webinar. So the first metaphor I used was music, meaning if the students are one voice and the curriculum is a second voice, those two voices need to be in harmony. If one of them strikes a discord, it's not going to work. But they're not the only two voices. Next slide. There we go. There are two other voices that my students taught me this, that are really, really important if we're going to have four-part harmony. The third voice is we, the faculty, who we are, what we do, who we represent, and who we don't represent. And the fourth voice is the campus community, who it is, who it's not, who it represents, who it doesn't represent. And the metaphor I try to talk with faculty, students, administrators, everybody about is that the four voices on the screen all need to be singing together. Harmony, four-part, not just with your head down looking at one of them as if it were the only thing to look at or the only song to sing. Now, one more slide, and I'm going to just isolate these four voices. And then one more slide, I'm going to move around a little. Oops, one back. Okay, I've isolated them, but you know where I'm going. You just saw that slide. Let's go one more slide, which is the last slide. What I've got there is showing, or at least attempting to show, how interconnected these all are. To say it another way, if you tug on one of the boxes, all the other ones jiggle too. And if you connect two of them, you actually are connecting all four. There is one more slide. What I put up is actually a systems view. That's probably the only point I wanted to make in these framing comments, was that if we're going to address broader participation in so many ways, you can't just look at one part as if it's the whole. Rather, you need something that's connecting at least the four things I have on the screen: the students, the faculty, the content, and the broader campus environment. And with that, I think I'm going to stop and then pause and see where we are in this webinar. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit for people who are listening to this and thinking about how might I get started? You know, what is the team I should build, or, you know, what are some of the things I should think about, obstacles or barriers I might need to, that I might face?
I see that the systems view is still up there. And what I like about that particular slide is it means there are multiple entry points. You can start in the curriculum. You can start with yourself. You can start with the students, as I did, or you could start in the wider campus climate. But any one of those are entry points. The only thing I think I really learned in how many years of fumbling around was they're all connected to each other.
And can you give one or two examples of a specific teaching strategy or something that you did that seemed to have positive results?
Let me mention two briefly, and I'd be glad to say more about either. One is, early on, I addressed what the images, the metaphors, everything is, who was there and who was missing. And I looked at countless documents, textbooks, everything to try to just make the materials more inclusive. That was my work in the 90s. I think a lot of it has been done now. The part that concerns me more now is the actual content. And when I said chemistry in context broke the mold, what I meant by that is it started teaching societal issues rather than teaching bonding. Now, we did bonding, but we did it through the ozone layer, or we did it stratospheric ozone layer, or we did it through air quality, or we did it through energy and food or plastics. And I think that particular change in starting to pick topics in science, chemistry for me, that really meant something to somebody, started meaning something to my students as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And if you have time to stick around after the three sets of speakers are done, we were going to bring everybody up on stage together to answer questions.
That'd be great. Okay,
Okay, thanks.
signing off.
Okay, now we'll be speaking with Liesl from University at Buffalo. And just a reminder that you can raise your hand and come up on stage or type a question into the box for our speakers. Hi, Liesl. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to hearing a little bit
everybody.
about
I hope everybody can hear me. It gives me to participate today because this subject's very near and dear to my heart. My usual trajectory in that I worked in the tech sector in Silicon Valley for 16 years, joining the university as the Dean of Engineering. And two things were truly shocking when I came back to the university environment, back to academia. One was that we did a lot of that showed that traditional teaching methods had really for 95% of the students that were enrolling in university engineering programs. It was deeply concerned to find that enough really weren't very effective. And to the that no, we didn't have the data show that the say on the stage method of teaching wasn't differing content. A lot of research has been done since. The other really shocking thing was the inclusion of women in many of STEM disciplines had stagnated or reversed itself in the previous 8 to 10 years. Computer science, chemical engineering, electrical, back in terms of the percentages, let me say, in degrees. So that was, if I may say so, watching things getting better for the generation. So I wanted to talk, I am going to go into the trenches. I wanted to talk a little bit about the program you get good retention rates. I don't know. We have a retention problem for women and minority students going through the undergraduate. That statement is strong in minority students, but as a broad track, the students they are very likely to succeed at least as well as majority population outcomes. And all that is to do with which is 20 years of effort and refining what we do, particularly in our first year programs. We have a set of activities that we bundle together and we call the first year experience. And it has meetings at them, but let me step through and talk about the why and the how of how we deliver this component. The first thing is students have some kind of an engineering program. We have an engineering 3-hour course changes straight away when they're okay, it's focused learning. And so the students are broken up into teams of it's a winner is no accident because the next part of that program is that those teams are mentored by. I must be struggling with the technology. We have 10 students mapped to one near peer mentor, third year or fourth year student who was particularly successful themselves, student, and is willing to spend time. They are paid employees. They spend a lot of time in section, and they both mentor their project-based teams and in the classroom, and the instructor is doing an active learning exercise. They are working with the teams of students in the classroom as well to help them work through their engineering logic. The first year bond very tightly with those peer mentors and those near peer mentors, full educational behaviors. Again, my apologies. What we do is we take cohorts of students, 20, 25 students. We block schedule them as a cohort through the first year introductory material, through physics, through math, through chemistry, and obviously as they end up in the same teams within the introduction to engineering curriculum. The reason for that is because what we found is when we were bringing in 400 freshman students or 600 freshman students, it was very easy for them to get lost in that sea of students. So we wanted to build a smaller cohort for them to build friendships within straight away, day one when they come to the university, and quickly start feeling like they were going to see familiar faces everywhere they went through their first year curriculum. That has been a very powerful tool for us to help students feel settled very quickly into the environment and feel like they have a home within the School of Engineering. The next thing we do is we have very tight integration with our colleagues within the College of Arts and Sciences that deliver a lot of the curriculum for our first year students, the math, the chemistry, the physics in particular, but also, of course, biology and so forth. We work very closely and very directly with the faculty that deliver the content in the college. And by closely, I mean every week there's a conversation about what's going to be in the curriculum, how are you teaching it, what examples are you giving, what were the homework problems. That all comes over to us on a weekly basis. The advantage of that is that the instructor in the Introduction to Engineering program can quickly drop in references to that material that connects it for the students to give them context, again to Kathy's comments, to give them context about what they're learning and why it matters, how it all glues together. So that's been very powerful. The other thing that we do with that information that comes from our colleagues that are delivering curriculum elsewhere on the campus is that we have a program that's called small groups, is all we call it. But what it really is a tutorial program. So all of our first year students are eligible to turn up for small group tutorials. And typically what happens is they go straight from a lecture session in physics or math or chemistry. They come straight back into the engineering domain, and immediately, straight after the lecture, they can walk into a tutorial session where an engineering instructor or an engineering graduate student will be standing there ready to take what they just learned, give a high-level summary of it, and then map it back to engineering concepts to explain the context, to give them a framing for why does this matter and how does it really work in an engineering world. So we're reinforcing what was just taught in physics and math and chemistry, but we're also giving that higher level framing for the students to really understand, why am I doing this? Why does it matter? How does it map to engineering? That has been very, very powerful and lifted many students into higher grades than they would have otherwise collected. So that's important. We do a lot of work on messaging what the habits are of truly successful students. We know from the data that we can collect in the classroom about attendance, about responsiveness to in-class activities, about how much time they spend online doing various activities. By week 3, we are able to predict with good accuracy whether students are likely to succeed or not likely to succeed, and then we can intervene. We can get with them through their near-peer mentors. We can get with them and have conversations about, right now you look like you're an at-risk student. Let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about how we can change behaviors, habits, what's missing. Are you in financial distress? Is there something going on with housing stability? Do you have food insecurity issues? All of those things can be addressed very early in the semester because we can see the predictions very early on in the data. So that's something that's been a powerful tool too, to help remediate quickly if things look like they're not going well. So we have a lot of active learning in the classroom, and so we run large sections. There's, we're a state school. We have relatively modest tuition levels. It is not possible for me to run first-year engineering with 25 students in a classroom, and frankly, I don't know that it would be a good solution anyway. I can't find 25 gifted instructors to put in front of those small sections to teach the way I want them to be taught. I would rather have a large hall with my students in it, 200 students at a time, with a great instructor down the front of the classroom, than a whole pile of sections that are running a bit freeform with not very good instructors. So what we do is we run large sections with 200 students in a room with these peer mentors, near-peer mentors, in the classroom, in the lecture theatre, I should say. The instructor, though, is rapidly flipping between sage on the stage, big framing, here's my message, to, all right, now we're going to do an activity. You're going to get into a group quickly, and they know their groups, they're already pre-assigned, with your near-peer mentor as part of your group, and we're going to step through part of a design exercise. We're going to do some problem solving around criticality paths, around process optimization, around, all those sorts of problems that you would expect engineering students to get on top of relatively quickly as concepts. And the flip between sage on the stage to engaged active learning is happening on order of 4 or 5 times in a 50-minute lecture. So there's a lot of flipping backwards and forwards. We've built a technology platform that allows the students to quickly be typing in their answers to different questions. All those answers are appearing on the screen at the front of the lecture theatre, so they can see each other's thinking. They can pick up from each other's learning, incorporate it in their own, and add on to it in a really interactive way. Their near-peer mentors are guiding the discussion and helping them think about things. They're not giving the answers, clearly, but they're certainly there as a support mechanism. And that's very, very important for weaker teams that aren't getting quickly to ways of thinking about things in a systems manner. So that's very important. Advisement. We've done a lot of work on advisement. One of our understandings is that students that are not particularly well prepared for college coming in the door struggle mightily with ambiguity. It's really the kiss of death if they just can't figure out how the organization works and how they're going to move through it. So we work very, very hard, and we've done an enormous amount of work in the last 5 or 6 years on clarity of advisement. There are now online tools for the students to say, to map ahead through the curriculum. If I pick this course here and this course here, what is it going to do for my time to degree? What does it mean? What are the implications for me in terms of getting the curriculum finished and to degree? That's been really very important. They are mandated to have a face-to-face meeting with an advisor at least once a semester, and they cannot enroll in the following semester's courses until that has happened. That gives our advisors an opportunity to get a little peek behind the scenes to say, well, what's really going on for this student? Are there other issues that we need to be giving them help on? Do they have mental health issues? Do they have physical health issues? Do they have, family crises going on? Just that, the human connection, but forcing it so that we don't get students just drifting away completely without us ever understanding what's going on and why did the student not stay with us and succeed, has been very important. These online tools are terrific, and interestingly, we track the students' engagement with the online tool. So we get when they come to meet the advisor, we have some idea of what's been going on in the student's head because we can see what they were poking at before they turn up for the advisement meeting. So that's been really important, those digital maps. In addition to these digital maps being available online, but because of that machine that we built, we're able to print out basically and hand to the student at every advisement meeting a forward-looking plan that gets them to the end of their degree. And so the goal there is that there's no ambiguity, that at the end of every advisement session, a physical piece of evidence has been handed over that says, right now, this is what we think is going on. We agree, we, the university, you, the student, agree that this is where we're going and this is where we're tracking. What else? We have faculty mentoring as a fairly significant component of what we do. The faculty volunteer to sign up as first-year mentors. It is not expected that they're going to maintain necessarily long-term relationships with these students because they might not end up in the right discipline for that faculty member. But what we're trying to do is break down the barriers for students to be prepared to talk to real life faculty members without a whole pile of fear. And so they get assigned to a faculty mentor and they're expected to have 2 face-to-face meetings with that faculty member during their first or second semester on campus. It doesn't need to be more than, what are you interested in doing? What brought you to UB? What are your aspirations and hopes? It's a really quick conversation, but what it means is they know one faculty member, they have a door they can knock on if they need to, but it also gets them over that first hurdle of having that first conversation with a real life faculty member one-to-one. So that we're just trying to normalize that process. And that's also been pretty powerful. Many of the students, of course, stay bonded to that faculty member. So we do find that that persists if there's any kind of connection made. But it also opens a door to the next faculty mentoring relationship that they will need along the way. One of our, so that's pretty much the framing for our first year experience. The results of that are that we run in the high 80s, I should say, for first year to second year retention in the engineering disciplines. To my mind, that's amazing because in my experience, 17-year-olds don't actually know much about where they're going and why should they. We keep the doors open for students to come in from other disciplines and to outflow to other disciplines. If they arrive on campus and decide that their passion is actually in philosophy, then they should go and do philosophy. We're not trying to hold on to them if that's not their passion. But with all that, we are running at about, I think we're running at about 88% retention from first year to second year, which we'll view that as victory. And especially at a state school, I haven't got a lot of resources. I can't apply just more humans to the problem. We have to be able to solve the retention and completion issues at a systems level at scale. And just to give you some framing there, I think this semester we have 6,400 students in engineering. We're the largest engineering program in New York State. So when I say at scale, I mean there's a lot of humans. Truth in advertising. This is not to say that we do not have problems with retention and completion issues. We absolutely do. 2 issues which I think are kind of interesting. So about 40% of our students are first in their families to come to university. So that provides its own special challenges because they don't necessarily have a lot of support from home, or they may have good support, but they don't have good information coming from home to bolster their educational aspirations. But interestingly, one of our biggest challenges is because we're part of the SUNY system and a state school, we have many students come to us transferring from 2-year colleges or even 4-year colleges elsewhere into UB. Interestingly, that population of students is very poor in terms of women and minority participation. And so as good a job as we can do attracting women and minority students to UB directly, that on the outgoing side, our demographics are very, very influenced by the fact that many of our students come to us through transfer paths. And then among the transfer students, there's a very small percentage of women and minority students. So that's an ongoing problem that we're just starting to tackle that now, to figure out how do we reach back to community colleges to do a better job of helping them attract women and minorities into the transfer pipeline. So that's a whole separate problem that we're struggling with now. And at that point, I'll wrap up, and I'm very happy to take questions, of course.
All right, thanks a lot, Lisa. Like I said, if you can stick around after Mike, we'll bring everybody up. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi. Can everybody hear me? Or that is, say, I hope you can. And if you can't, please put something in the text box if it cuts out, so I can look down for that.
Okay, you sound great so far. So just to begin, you were recently named the Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that position and what some of the challenges and goals you have during your time there.
Yeah, thanks very much. I am the new kid on the block, and I mean really new. I just started about a month ago. But just to give you a little background, I'm a professor of Greek and Latin here at Classics, and I think I attracted notice for this position because of my involvement in Faculty Senate and dealing with sort of difficult issues in the Faculty Senate. And so I was brought on, I think, as much for diplomacy among faculty as anything else. But my I've been brought on to work on a specific project of gateway courses. And I think that this is a technical term, or at least a widely used term at a lot of places, but maybe not everywhere. Gateway courses here are defined as those very large courses that you absolutely have to get through if you want to major in a topic or in a particular major. So general chemistry is a good example. Introduction to psychology is another example. We have these in engineering, and they're all across the whole university. They cluster in the College of Arts and Sciences. And a gateway course is not just a large course. It also is defined as a large course that has a significant failure rate. So a lot of students just don't get through it. And so if they fail the class, they often will not carry on with a major. And so we are trying to find ways to improve this gateway experience in any way we can. So I was given this sort of qualitative mandate to make these courses better. And if you're in the audience and you're not familiar with Cornell University, you might assume that it's all, the streets are paved with gold and that sort of thing. But the reality is a little dirtier than that. So we have significant challenges with educating our undergraduates, in part because the university is so focused on research at the graduate level. So the four components that I am tasked with looking at are wait lists. How do students get on and off the wait list? How are they finding out what their position is on the wait list? It's causing significant stress for the students not to know this. Some of them are going to the health center and seeking counseling because they can't find out whether they're going to get into a class. So waitlist management in every way I'm looking to improve. We have significant differentials in the student outcomes. So across the board, underrepresented minorities are failing at greater rates. Women are failing at greater rates. First generation students are failing at greater rates. I haven't seen the actual data yet, but I'm told the differentials are stark. And so I am hoping to find out from maybe some people here in our audience best practices for improving some of those differentials. I'm told that, for example, allowing students to delay taking general chemistry by a semester can be at least as effective as having a private tutor, something like that. We're also looking at improving infrastructure of the classrooms. Some of the classrooms are quite dilapidated. They've been around for 100 years and they haven't been redecorated since. And the last component that sort of ties all these together is this active learning initiative. And Liesl, I heard you talk about it too. I'm guessing that the term is widely used, active learning. In foreign languages, this is sort of our bread and butter. So we do this anyway. And I was surprised to find that a lot of these large courses still involve the sage on the stage, simply standing up and lecturing as though this were the 19th century, maybe a few slides or something. And so as we think about redesigning these courses and how to make them better and more effective, I'm told the data are really pretty clear that active learning can improve all those outcomes, probably more than any other lever we could pull. And we've already seen significant improvements in the physics department here. So one of my missions is to try and see how we can incentivize different instructors, departments, units to adopt a more active learning style in the classroom. One way we can do that is by ripping out the old desks with the fixed chairs and that sort of thing and bringing in those kind of small tables with the chairs on wheels that students can rearrange and get in groups. It's not clear we can do that in the auditoriums, but that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. So there's sort of this four-pointed beast that we're trying to tackle, and it's not clear where to go first. There are about 35 gateway courses here. About 6 of them are already involved with this separate active learning initiative that's being dealt with on a different part of the campus. So one of our strategies we're exploring is, could we incentivize active learning by offering to remodel some of the classrooms, for example? So that brings me to some of the risks we're dealing with. I work for the central administration at Cornell. The problem is central administration at Cornell is sort of a weak entity. The colleges here are quite strong. The deans do get, some of them get a small appropriation from the central administration, but mostly they're autonomous. And so we are a bit anxious about incentivizing the wrong behavior. If we go to some college that hasn't remodeled their classrooms for 50 years, and we say, hey, we can improve your students' outcome by paying the full cost for you. Of course, that dean will be thrilled, but what are we going to do in the meantime? I think the problem I can tackle soonest, and I hope people have good ideas, and if you do, I hope you'll share them, is waitlist management technology. Right now, waitlists are handled all across the campus in a completely haphazard fashion. Some departments do them with a pencil and paper. Others have separate websites set up. There's nothing being handled by the main software we use here, PeopleSoft, although I'm told it has that capability. I'm told that the technology is completely out there to make it dynamic and allow waitlist protocols. So, for example, if you are teaching in the math department and you want to prioritize seniors who must have this course to graduate this spring, you can bump them straight to the top. There are ways, evidently, of pulling all the student prerequisites and graduation dates to automate the whole process. Right now, it's taking hundreds and hundreds of overtime hours all across the campus for people to do this by looking it up separately. So that seems like an easy win, but I'm told it may not be as easy as I hope it is. Yeah, so those are the basic problems that I'm meant to tackle in this role.
And can you tell us a little bit about how online courses might fit? One of the projects I recently worked on was taking a face-to-face course that is very popular on campus and usually has about 600 to 700 students, and creating a fully online version for the residential students, with one of the goals being helping to increase retention in major. And I was just wondering how you might see that fitting in with some of the problems you mentioned.
It's a great idea. The hard part is finding out what's already going on. I teach an online course myself in the winter term, and when I went to find out best practices on how to design it a few years ago, I was told, well, there are online courses, but nobody's really keeping an eye on them, so we don't actually know. Cornell is very much a residential university. There are very few students who commute in. So if we are going to explore this, and it sounds like a great idea, we need to find ways of making that online experience better than coming to class. So as I think about all these things, I'm not sure, human behavior is reciprocal. If we incentivize this, how are the students and the faculty going to react? If the professor finds him or herself standing in front of an empty auditorium because everybody's watching the pre-recorded lectures back in their apartment, what will that do to learning? I don't know. I like very much the idea of modules and tutorials that students can do back in their dorm rooms. I was just hearing from the director of the Language Resource Center here yesterday that 5 years ago, students had to come to the language lab to sit down with the microphones and the headphones and listen to the languages. Now they can do it anywhere. They can sit in a Starbucks and practice. They can be at home and practice. So that seems like a model that is worth trying to push out to the larger campus. That's what I'm going to be working on. Let me just say one more thing, if I may, about retention. So it touches on some of the things I've heard our other speakers say already. The big problem with the waitlist technology in these gateway courses is that savvy students, they know that if you pester a professor, you can usually get into a class. if they see that they're put on a wait list, they know that they can email the department staff person or the professor and find out and advocate for themselves, or at least find out what's going on. We are told that first generation students are especially at risk for not really having any idea what to do when they find out they're on a wait list. And as a result, some of them are not, they would have gotten into the class, but they just take themselves out. They don't sign up for it. They don't major in engineering or chemistry or whatever it was they'd always maybe thought their heart was set on. So this seems like something we absolutely need to fix as fast as we can.
That would be great if anyone in the audience is doing anything on waitlist management. If you want to come up on stage and share that or put something in the chat box.
So those are, well, just in general, that's my mandate.
I think Michael's raising really good points, which I hadn't even thought about mentioning. We at UB flipped the whole waitlist story on its head. We have had, we're in, I think, our 5th year of a program called Finish in 4. And it's a program that, it's a bit cheesy. What it requires is that the students sign up to be Finish in 4 students, and among engineering students, I think more than 75% of them sign up for it. They commit to being active in the advisement process, that they will actively seek advisement before dropping, adding, trying to do anything wacky with the curriculum. And in return for that, we commit that the courses will be available to them when they need them. So the pressure was really pushed all the way back to the departments and the faculty to say, if you've built this damn curriculum, you need to make sure the seats are available in the numbers that are needed. And we do all this like modeling. We know how many kids are coming in every semester for every course. It's not ambiguous, right? That data, you know who's coming because you started them in first year, right? you let them all in. You know how fast they go. You know how many are going to succeed and persist and da-da-da-da. To a high degree of accuracy, you should be able to model how many are coming. So now, department, you better get the courses and sections in place to do that. And if we fail, we agree we're going to pay the students' tuition. So boy, did that focus everybody's mind on the problem, right? Is that this can't be that we let students into the university and then we don't have the courses ready for them when they need to take them if they're tracking along an advised path that we recommended to them. And so we flipped that whole thing upside down. So there are no wait lists because, damn it, if we've screwed up, we're going to put another section out there, right? Because it's become our problem, not their problem. Because how would a first generation student ever figure this rubbish out, right? I mean, it's not a reasonable conversation to make it their problem. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is the large auditorium problem. We do active learning in those large auditoriums. It is not ideal, but there's no way we could afford to rehab all of the auditoriums that we have on campus. So the students sit in their teams. They have to sit either 4 in a row or 2 in front and 2 behind, so that when we say work with a team, they can pivot and turn to each other and do those active learning experiences in that auditorium environment. We all agree it's not brilliant. But we've done now, I don't know, 12 years of working that way in that same built infrastructure. The students never comment on it. It is never written on their feedback forms as the worst part of their experience, right? They don't think it's abnormal. I mean, we know it's not optimal, but they just do it, right? When the instructor says you have to sit in your teams, you're going to work, now, start doing your projects, they turn around and do it. They just make it work. So I think it's not reasonable for the faculty to hold that up and say, I can't do active learning because of the built environment. Tell them to figure it out, because the built environment problem is too expensive for anybody to solve quickly. Thanks.
Thank you.
So one of the strange factors we have here is that I'm told that almost every student on a wait list does get in to the course eventually, or they would have gotten in if they hadn't taken themselves out of the running. So it's a little bit different, and I that's an amazing program. I'm almost certain there's no way we're going to be able to offer to pay tuition for here. It's a wonderful program that you have, but here it really is. We've got to improve the communication to these students, and we got to do it fast. My dream is to have the students get a text message saying a spot is opened up in the class. You have 6 or 8 or 12 hours to sign up if you still want to do it. So hustle up. Or they could go to a website and they could see this is your position in the wait list. I know the tech is out there. So that's a great solution. One thing you said that was, Liesl, you're a dean, right?
Yeah,
I'm not. So when you, yeah, when you say tell the faculty to get with it, I'm pretty sure I can't do that. That makes it a little trickier. So I've got to find diplomatic ways of incentivizing them to do it.
And are there any, I know one of the things we talk about at Cornell is that retention at Cornell is not necessarily the problem, but as, we've kind of indicated, retention major can be, more of the problem. Outside of active learning, are there any successes or initiatives that that you could share that Cornell has been working on?
Well, nothing specific. I'm still getting up to speed on that. But what is quite clear is that the university as a whole is attracting more and more computer science students who want to major in applied sciences. And so it is now the case at Cornell. It's quite easy to take courses all the way across campus. That didn't used to be the case. If you came into a particular college, you were more or less bound into that college. But we now are seeing, I wouldn't say an exodus, but a huge amount of interest from students who apply and say, I want to study the humanities. And then they get here, and the first thing they try and do is transfer to the business school, or they try to transfer into computer science or something like that. So I'm told that in economics and computer science, they can't hire people fast enough to come and teach the courses. And so it's a bit opposite. It's a bit opposite. STEM retention, they're retaining more than they want to retain.
That's interesting.
It's not good for us language people, but we're doing what we can.
Yeah. So at this point, what we usually do is bring up the other guest speakers so that we can have the three of you can have a discussion together and even pose questions to one another. But I'd again like to encourage anyone in the audience to put a question in the Q&A box or to raise your hand and come up on stage. Do you have, Kathy, a question or anything you wanted to ask to Mike or Lisa?
I can make a comment. I'm also going to confess, Mike, I'm a Cornell grad, class of 72. Yes, I love the thing.
So am I.
Hey, welcome in.
Yeah. The but that never got mentioned is my 4 years at Cornell, I never had a woman faculty member. There are students today who still never see anybody like them in the classroom. What I worry about is that we're still in the mold of wanting to fix the students and fix the system, but not change the community in which our students are living and working and doing all sorts of other things.
Go, Mike.
The case any longer, I think that I can't imagine a student would go through Cornell and not have a woman professor at this point. The faculty as a whole.
How about a black?
Yeah, that can still happen at UB in chemical engineering.
Is that right? This place has gotten quite a bit more diverse very fast.
It has gotten more female. And that is true here at Wisconsin. By the way, I'm not just picking on Cornell. I was a grad student here at UW-Madison. I didn't see a woman professor here either 4 years later, from 72 to 76. That's changed. It's changed at Cornell too. But what if you're an African-American woman?
Yeah, forget
I think
that.
that's a challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge every department's facing across campus. One of the common complaints is that the pipeline is still small. And how do we, when we go to make appointments, if there's not but this is the common complaint we're hearing, there's not enough applicants to diversify the faculty as much as we'd like to do.
Yeah, that's what I heard back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. What's taken us? Why so slow? To quote a very famous book title.
Okay, so here's a systems level approach to that. What we've done in the School of Engineering here at UB is we've mandated that for every student that's in the undergraduate ranks who has better than a something, I think it's 3.3 GPA, a faculty member must have a conversation with every one of those students one-on-one to ask them have they thought about grad school. Because what we know is that women and minority think that they're not ready for minority students think that they're not ready for grad school, and or they have just never thought about it if they're first generation. And so what we've done is it's like a checklist manifesto issue, right? We've just said every one of those students must have a one-on-one conversation with a faculty member, right? Typically it's just somebody who is teaching, in one of the two relevant semesters where those decisions are being made. And just sit them down and say, have you thought about going to grad school? And the students will often say, no. And I did a PhD because a faculty member stopped and said, have you thought about going to grad school? It literally had never crossed my mind before somebody stopped me and said, have you thought about going to grad school?
Yeah.
So we don't want to leave those.
Did that for me too. Thank you, Cornell.
Right.
Somebody did.
Thank you, Cornell. There you go. Not for me. I wasn't Cornell. I was in Australia. But we have to architect those conversations. We cannot leave them to chance because, honest to God, half the faculty are terrified of women and minority students. They feel like they won't be able to talk to them like humans. And they also can't understand what it was like not to be thinking about grad school. For many of them, it was so natural. They came from academic families. They came from high-achieving families. They came from privilege. They never can remember not thinking about grad school. Of course they thought about grad school. They were clever, bright students. But you have to architect the conversations. And we literally print out a list and say, you tell me when every one of those students has had a discussion. Just doing that has tripled the number of our own undergrads that persist into our own master's programs. It's certainly impacted the PhD levels as well. Because once you've opened the door to the conversation, then you can talk with them about, well, how can we support you in that? How can we help you get letters of recommendation? How can we reach out to other institutions and get you the pathways you need to succeed? But just saying you have to have the conversation was transformational.
Yeah, that feeds in quite a bit to just there's a lot of conversation around inclusive practices and working with faculty to create environments where students feel safe and they have an increased sense of belonging. Can any of you speak to programs or initiatives you started at where you're working on that?
I want to bring Letitia Thomas up. Letitia, talk about what we do at UB. I can see her trying to get her audio sorted.
Yeah, I think she has to.
Here we go. Can we make it happen? There we go.
Hello.
Hey, Letitia.
I'm muted. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, the question was what we're doing at UB. Oh, we're doing a lot of different things. We are running groups with women in STEM. I am actively recruiting for our summer program. In STEM, we have anywhere from 10 to 15 students who are on campus working with faculty. And I find that when students do research with faculty, then they really do start to think about doing a master's or a PhD. I was just talking with our research methods instructor, who is one of our PhD students in chemical engineering, and he's currently really seriously thinking about the professoriate if we can keep companies from coming in and kind of swiping our students away. That seems to be a problem, is that the companies have such, fabulous offers and great work-life balance and wonderful salaries and great locations. And, sometimes students are led astray away from the professoriate. We try to take advantage of different conferences. I'll be heading to the National Society of Black Engineers during spring break to try to recruit graduate students. And really, we're trying to take advantage of a lot of programs that are currently available to, let students know that graduate school is an option and that the professoriate is an option. It's a great great career, a chance to really do your own research and set your own path.
It was great.
Kathy, is Madison have any programs or professional development for faculty around inclusive practices in the classroom?
Absolutely. And getting back to the idea that you can't just work on what's going on for the students, we've got to change ourselves as well. The thing about a faculty career being a great career, in one sense, I want to say that's true. In another sense, I want to say there are things about the job culture that could be more welcoming to all sorts of people. And if I make the point, I think we've got to look at many dimensions. They're all connected to each other. What's going to take somebody to want to stay and work here? Having been the first woman in more than one time, being the first one isn't all that great. It's, I miss kind of having company. When I was at Cornell, I needed a lab partner.
Now, Mike, I know when Julia Tom Levy was actually a guest on our first session, and she talked quite a bit about the work she did in the active learning. And when asking her, what was it that made it possible, the thing that she really stressed was time, being given time in her schedule to think about reimagining her course. And I know that's also a difficult thing to allow and provide for faculty. I'm not sure if you or Kathy can speak to any ways that, universities are trying to either change the tenure process or promote teaching and learning more.
I just want to, Mike, for something you said earlier, you mentioned the word incentives. And I just thought you were right on target when you said incentives, faculty incentives. Go ahead.
Oh, well, it's funny you say that because, yes, time, I think, is the most precious commodity most of us have as faculty. I mean, that's what we really want to spend our time on. I can tell you what's going on here, although I'm not in any way sort of in charge of the initiative. The Active Learning Initiative has, in physics, which is the department Julia was involved with, the department went through a number of rounds of discussions, and they said, we as a department want to move to this active learning approach. This is not something they had done before. And because the department's large enough, they wound up giving Julia and a couple other faculty a whole semester off to spend the time redesigning the main course. In other words, they'd had the whole semester off teaching just to work on how they were going to redo that course. And now that model is being rolled out across the university in different ways. We had a call for proposals in my home college, the College of Arts and Sciences, and they said, what would you do to increase active learning? And my department, Classics, won one of these. And what we ended up doing was getting a postdoc who's going to join us here this year, whose main task is going to be to work on curriculum design with us. So this will be with a regular PhD in Classics, but with the main and only task of helping us teach better. So in a small department like ours, we can't just give somebody a semester off, or the courses don't get taught. So we thought this is the next best solution, to have somebody come and help us track in real time.
At Madison, are they doing anything different with respect to, providing time or incentives, Kathy?
What Mike is saying has a very familiar ring, and I think it has a familiar ring across the country, that we are doing things like Mike suggests. The ones I'm holding out for are to change the tenure system. Not necessarily radically, but radically enough that the time you spend improving the campus climate, that the time you spend with students of all sorts of walks of life, the time you spend in the classroom becomes more highly valued. And we're both at R1 institutions. I know what the rules are here. Nonetheless, I think we need incentives and people who are committed to this kind of a campus climate and this kind of a change. And weave it into the DNA, and the DNA of my institution is the tenure, the policies and procedures.
If I can respond, I think that's it's a great idea. I agree with you. I think that the tenure model we're using now is for a different time. It is not very family friendly. It's not friendly to all kinds of different people. It's not friendly really to anybody. I think that's not by accident. But I think, at least my sense is that it would be best if our different respective research fields would issue new statements about the value of, for example, in classics. I'd like to see our national organizations say these are the best practices for a professor of classics coming up for tenure.
Yeah.
It's hard to have the university do it because I don't think anybody wants to be the first one to say we're not going to do this any longer.
All right.
And
I was going to say
That's
that
it.
comes back to the systems view, and our professional societies are part of this system as well. The thing I was going to say is the American Chemical Society, I used to say, oh, it's their fault. They haven't issued guidelines for general chemistry that are open enough. They're too focused on covering content. And it turns out that they're not. The guidelines that come out of our professional societies are actually pretty good. And it's the institutions, or it's us. It's not necessarily them.
I want to give a shout out along those lines. The American Physical Society has done fantastic work on discrimination issues, origins of discrimination, how to mitigate discrimination. They'll give outstanding advice, and it's the institutional time lag. It's hard to get people's minds to change. Having said that, as dean, I have considerable power to change the way we think about tenure and also about hiring. So we now ask for a diversity statement from all of our applicants. And my goodness, are those telling, right? That is my first line of defense, is hiring the right people in. And so I frequently read diversity statements that say things like, well, I met 3 women once. Well, okay, that's not what I meant. Because we ask a very specific question. How are you going to build a classroom environment that's inclusive and allows everyone to succeed? We ask a very targeted question. And literally, I've had people come back and say, I met somebody in my field once who wasn't like me. And so that's my first filter. And if the departments try and hire those people, try to bring them forward for interview, I'm like, oh, yeah, hell no. Yeah, no, I don't need this. I don't need this in my classrooms. And because now we're lucky, because the STEM disciplines are growing. And so we're hiring. That has been transformational. Not bringing in people that are just perpetuating the same mindset, being able to filter them out right at the beginning, and not after they got here and interviewed and allowed the faculty to fall in love with them, but before they ever got on campus, I can just say, yeah, no, sorry, no, not happening, not bringing this in for interview. Because I don't want to have to change their understanding about gender and race. I want to bring in people that are already competent to talk about gender and race in the disciplines.
Do you think there's any opportunity for the humanities to help out with this? Because our classrooms are very different from what you're describing. We have incredibly diverse classrooms. The competition to get a job in the humanities is, there is no industry, right? So, you either get this or you go do something else. So it's extremely fierce. And so we tend not to get those kind of turkeys that you're talking about. Or if they do, they get lost early on.
Right.
So I wonder.
I think Turkey is, in the classroom sense, turkeys is unfair. They're just ill-informed. They have no idea what they're up against. They're clueless, right? It's not malicious. It's implicit bias, right? It is that unexamined element of most of humanity. Is there a way for the humanities to participate? Oh, yeah. In fact, this whole event was co-organized by our Gender Institute, and that brings together people from across the disciplines at UB, and we have really vigorous discussion about how to solve these problems campus-wide, and absolutely great discussions across the disciplines in that regard. So I think there is enormous opportunity to figure that out together.
Liesl, I made a joke that nobody thought was very funny, but what I said was, I know how to get more women in STEM. I know how to get more women in chemistry, physics, computer science. I know how to do it. The way you do it is you lower the salaries.
Oh!
He was laughing.
Yeah. That hoary old beast. Yeah, so that's it. That is a really important issue. The one that we just learned, this goes back to hiring again a bit, but it plays into the salary argument. We as a culture have a really hard time seeing women as being brilliant. And what do we all want to hire for our R1 institutions? We all want to hire brilliant faculty. And so because nobody can see women as brilliant, they get weak letters of reference when they apply for jobs. They get letters that speak to them being hardworking. diligent, team players, great communication skills. What am I missing? Something. Well, you get the idea.
Friendly.
Anyway, nice, friendly. Oh my God, we are so friendly, we women, so friendly. Okay, not me, but other women, very friendly. Men don't get that. Men get that they're brilliant, that they're inspired, that they've done fantastic analytical thinking. Well, when you're sitting looking at a package, a dossier for tenure or an application for a job, and there's this stark difference between these letters of recommendation from people who actually want them to succeed, it's really hard to pick the B grade packet for the person who's hardworking and diligent, but not brilliant, not inspired, not a genius. So, I mean, you go away and practice looking at the women around you and calling them brilliant. If you haven't been practicing, it sticks in your throat. It's so hard to fight against the social constructs that have got us to this point. It's like physically, brilliant, hard to get out. I mean that. No, it really is. It's this huge hurdle for us to even describe the women in our universities, leaders in the community, as being brilliant. Getting past that would help solve the pay gap problem, because that's hurting us every time we come up for a promotion, every time we come up for an award, every time we come up for a prize, every time we're nominated for any damn thing, we're hardworking. Well, I'm not hardworking. I'm no more hardworking than the bloke down the corridor, but somehow he's brilliant and I'm not. Well, we're not. We're both brilliant, right? It's really frustrating. So I think that's something we can all do something about. We can educate the people around us. When I see letters of recommendation that come from my own faculty for my own women students, I send them back, that have that feature, I send them back. I say, I'm sorry, this is really gendered, and here's how it's really gendered. And by the way, here's the letter that you gave me last for your male students, which didn't have the same language. That stuff we can work on in our local environments, I think.
Thank you. And I think we have time maybe just for one more question, then we need to wrap up. And one of the things I know, here at Cornell and everywhere, everyone's talking about the word innovation, and how can we be more innovative on campus? And, we talked a lot about active learning and things specific to courses, but one of the things I was wondering is if anybody's really reimagining the curriculum, how might we entirely reimagine the way students put together courses? And, like Mike, you mentioned modules. Like, would it be possible for students to take a few modules to create their own course to help with completion rates? And also thinking about places like Harvey Mudd, and I think this maybe relates to Kathy, what you mentioned, is, making courses more themed. So it's not just about coding or, say, for example, computer science, but it's about thinking about how you might provide clean water across, globally. And so I was just wondering if there were some, I hate to use that word innovative, but just, innovative things that people were doing to really just reimagine the whole experience.
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in with one quick comment. I don't think teaching chemistry as if people on the planet mattered is innovative. I think we know how to do it. It's a different question. Do we want to do it?
I don't know of any campus-wide initiatives. I certainly don't think that anybody would innovate on the level you're talking about, replacing a typical course of 3 or 4 credits with a module. Because the fear, which is rife among all the students, is they won't get into graduate school. So that would be tough. Mm-hmm. But I can give you an example if anybody's interested, not from STEM, but in our department of classics, we hired in the fall the first and probably last ever professor of the practice of Latin when the papal secretary of Latin in the Vatican decided to give up his job, give up the priesthood. The most competent Latinist on planet Earth, spent 10 years writing all the diplomacy for the Pope in Latin. And now he's a professor of the practice here. So that is what he's doing now, is he's teaching Latin as an active language. So he's teaching students to converse in it. And in just a single year, we're already rethinking our whole curriculum to sort of pivot much closer to the modern languages than the traditional, slave away at a page and look every word up in the dictionary. So we will see where that winds up.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. And if you don't mind, if you want to share those of you that had slide decks, if you want to share them with us, we can share them with the rest of the community. And people can find your emails and reach out to you if they have additional questions.
Of course. Thanks, Patrice.
All right, thank you. And then I'm not sure, Becky, if you can come, if you want to come back up. Well, Becky seems to still be frozen, unfortunately. But I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today and thank all the speakers who donated their time, and especially Chris and Shindig for allowing us to use their platform for this session. And we do have one final session for this year, and that will be March 14th. And that session was designed to really be a wrap up and touch on some of the themes and highlights. But certainly, if you have some burning questions after today's session or things that you've been thinking about from other sessions you've attended that you would like us to bring into the discussion, you can certainly reach out to us and let us know. And that session will be on March 14th. Same time from 12 to 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. And also, if you have any ideas or suggestions as far as topics or speakers that you would like us to bring in for the next school year, you can certainly let us know about that. And I would like to, again, just thank everyone. And unfortunately, Becky's sound wasn't working today, but thank you, Becky, for all your support and organizing this and moving this forward. And with that, I will sign off and see you next time.